Okay. I guess I do want to talk about rhythm a little bit more. We talked about it last time, but since I've sent you that email about it, I've actually added even more stuff. I've tried to make it as clear as possible because it is an important thing to understand rhythm to some degree, or at least to be familiar with it enough so that you can kind of be you can look up more information on it if you choose to. So under the music theory section, there's a lot of stuff that's on the time section. Basically, time, the way we're going to speak about it, can be talked about in different ways. You could subdivide the musical events into measures and beats. You could also space the events, and you could also change the speed of the events. And each of those things is slightly different. So just talking about measures, we were talking about this before, but I kind of made some graphics on it. Basically, if you take a piece of music and you subdivide it into larger units, you make them into measures, okay? So in Ableton, when you look at the numbering system, when you look at the numbers that are ascending, these numbers refer to the different measures, okay? And if you're familiar with a piece of sheet music, each of these boxed areas is a measure. You see a bar line. Measure is also called a bar, okay? You're subdividing the overall piece into larger groupings, okay? And notice how all of these measures are the same length. And the reason they're all the same length is because of their time signature. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. But the important thing, one of the important things to notice is how the measures are just climbing incrementally through time. So this is measure 1. This is the second measure. This is the third measure. This is the fourth measure. So if you look at this, you're basically, I've said it before, but I'll say it again, you're subdividing the overall piece of music into these measures, and you're climbing through them, okay? So that's measures and bars, but let's take a look at time signatures, okay? So time signatures basically tell you how long, one of the most important things about a measure is how long the measure is, okay? So like you're dividing the entire piece of music into these subdivisions, but how long are these subdivisions? And that's what the time signature tells you. And really the number that you really need to care about is the top number. So in Ableton, you're going to see this section where the time signature lives in the, you're going to see it right here, kind of near the transport controls. You're going to see it at the very top. And you see this, this thing 4/4, okay? And what this is referring to, I guess the most important thing you need to know is that the top number just tells you how many beats are in each measure. The bottom number tells you what type of beat it is, because this is kind of like the idea, you have to specify units. So for instance, if someone says, hey, how many, what do you want? Or like, how many, how far away is the thing? And you say, it's 5. And people say 5 what? Is it 5 feet away, 5 miles away, 5 kilometers away? So similarly, you can know that the measure is 4 things long, but what type of thing long is it? And that's what the bottom number tells you. It tells you that it's 4 quarter note beats long, okay? So, you know, when you're making a piece of music, knowing about a time signature might be valuable to you. But truth be told, most of the music that you're going to write probably is going to be in this time signature, 4/4. But if your piece is a waltz, for instance, your piece might be in 3/4. Okay. But this is just something to be aware of, just in terms of Ableton in general, that what this thing means. And this thing just refers to how long each measure is, okay? So if I shorten the measure, if I made this measure 2-4, instead of 4-4, these boxes there would be more boxes because these numbers would advance more often, okay? Let's talk about beats. We've talked about how each measure is subdivided into 4 beats, right? But what is a beat? What is a quarter note beat? So I've actually, since I sent you the last email, I've actually added an Ableton representation of this chart for you to observe below. But basically, we've talked about how measures are broader subdivisions of a piece. You know, you're taking a piece of music, you're subdividing it, you're boxing it up into little pieces. What beats are is when you subdivide these individual measures themselves, okay? So it's sort of a way to subdivide even further, okay? And the top number we've talked about of the time signature basically is the way that you subdivide, well, we haven't, the top number is actually the default subdivision of the measure, okay? So, for instance, in this time signature of 4-4, the top number tells you how many beats are in each measure. That's the default subdivision. It turns out that it is, if you see a 4, that means there are 4 quarter note subdivisions per measure, which is talked about right here, okay? So essentially a measure, the idea of beats is that you could subdivide the measure into even smaller parts. So in order to understand what subdivision is, it's important to know what people have labeled ways of subdividing things. So this thing right here is called a whole note, and you could actually subdivide this into half notes. Sorry, ooh, typo. You could subdivide this into half notes. Whoops. No, this is correct. I'm sorry. You could subdivide a whole note into half notes. You could subdivide a half note into quarter notes. You could subdivide a quarter note into eighth notes, and you could subdivide an eighth note into 16th notes. And you could actually see this, I've labeled it over here. So this is how a whole note looks in Ableton. You could subdivide this whole note into half notes, this half note into quarter notes. You see how it takes less time to play a quarter note than it does to do a whole note, right? It takes half as much time as it takes to do an eighth note as it does to do a quarter note, etc. It takes half the time to do a 16th note as it does to do an eighth note. And if you count the number of eighth notes, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 16th notes, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 16 of them. So the naming of this refers to this idea that if you have a measure of 4-4, meaning this time signature that we've talked about is the basic time signature in music that we're concerned with, there are 8 eighth notes in every measure. This is probably the way that you're going to see it, because this is probably the system that you're going to work in. If you divide that measure into quarter notes, there are 4 quarters. There's 4 quarter notes. They each take up a quarter of the entire measure. There are 2 half notes. They each take up a half of the measure. There are 16th notes. They each take up a 16th of the measure. Okay, so just understand intuitively, try to develop an intuition for the idea that you can subdivide beats into smaller beats. Don't worry so much about all of the terminology, like, oh, a whole note, a half note, a quarter. Just that will help you, but what's most important is this idea that you can actually subdivide things and make things longer and shorter. And just know that there are names for these things, and that if you it does help you interpret these numbers if you understand the names of these things. But you can also play things by ear and experiment with the placement of events. but just understand that each of these things is related to each other. Each of these types of beats is related to each other. They're all factors of each other. So, so for instance, a whole note, in terms of quarter note beats, it's 4 quarter note beats. A half note, in terms of quarter note beats, is 2 quarter note beats, right? A quarter note, in terms of quarter note beats, is 1 quarter note beat. It's the same thing. An eighth note, in terms of a quarter note beat, is half of a quarter note beat. A 16th note, in terms of a quarter note beat, is 1/4 of a quarter note beat, okay? So when you're actually looking at this right here is useful to know about, because when you're actually looking at the grid in Ableton, these numbers actually mean something. So let's actually talk about what these, what some of the numbers you might see mean. Okay, so if you're looking at a particular measure or a particular point in Ableton, in the timeline, in the transport, if you see a little tuplet of numbers, a triplet of numbers, this basically represents the grid position in your piece. Okay, so like if I'm in Ableton, I look at these numbers. Basically, I see all of these different numbers. These right here are just the measure numbers, right? 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. I'm just counting up through the measures, right? If I zoom in, I start seeing 2 numbers. If I zoom in even further, I start seeing 3 numbers, okay? And this is what I'm referring to, these 3 numbers, okay? So what these numbers represent are bars or measures, beats, and sixteenths, okay? So a bar, I've color-coded it too to help you. So the bar itself is the measure number. We've talked about measure numbers, right? They are the most crude subdivision of a piece of music, okay? The beat is the quarter note beat within this measure. So for instance, there are a certain number of quarter note beats per measure of 4/4, right? There's 4 beats in the measure. We've talked about the time signature. There's 4 beats in every measure of the 4/4 time signature. Similarly, if you're in a measure of 3/4, there are going to be 3 quarter note beats in every measure. So this is basically the position, the more crude position you're in terms of time. This is the more specific position within the measure that you're in. And then this is yet even a more specific position within this beat. So it's 16th note within this beat, within this measure, okay? And there are always 4 16th notes in every single quarter note beat. So, you know, for instance, there are 4 16th notes, 1, 2, 3, 4 in every quarter note beat, right? So you're basically looking, if you just look at this one measure, for example, what these 3 numbers are telling you is the position within the measure or the position of the measure itself. So it's basically, if you see this number, let's just pretend this is measure 1, 1.2.2. What this is saying is, in this measure, measure 1, we are in the second quarter note beat, so 1, 2, right? Or in Ableton, 1, 2. We're in the second quarter note beat, 1.2. You see that? Second quarter note beat. And then we are in the second 16th note of that beat, which means we're right here, right? Measure 1, measure 2, sorry, measure 1, we're in measure 1, which is the first number. And then the second number is the second quarter note beat, 1.2, right? The second quarter note beat, first quarter note beat, second quarter note beat, right? You can see that over here, first quarter note beat, second quarter note beat, right? Hopefully you can see my mouse okay. I've been meaning to get an app to make my mouse bigger. I forgot to download it. So second quarter note beat, and then the second, now we're interested in the second 16th note within this quarter note beat. So then the second 16th note is right here. So basically what this 1.2.2 refers to is this position right here. It's the start of the second 16th note in the second quarter note of the first measure, okay? If you're curious, like this may or may not be useful to you when you're creating music, but you know, use what you can and discard the rest. I just want you to be aware of this scheme. I want you to be aware of what beats are. I've never, you know, truth be told, I've taught this class I've taught this class in different iterations. I've taught the concepts in this class to beginners in different iterations. Everyone kind of, a lot of people just kind of come to their own conclusion about this. They kind of intuitively feel the beats. This is the first time I've gone so in depth about this, but this may be helpful to you, especially if you're struggling with specific placement of things. And so anyway, so we've talked about the beat scheme in Ableton, right? So let's just go through some examples. So let's say you have 1.3.3, okay? So the bar is the first measure, right? The beat is the third quarter note beat within this measure. And the 16th, it's the third 16th note within the above quarter note beat. So 1.3.3, okay? All right, so let's class, pipe in when I get to the correct, I'm gonna look for the correct measure, okay? Pipe in when I get to the correct measure. 1.3.3, okay? This is what we're interested in, okay? When I hover over the correct measure, tell me stop. I can't hear you. Stop. Oh, did someone say stop? Oh, can you hear me?
Professor, it looks like your mouse is just stopping at the far left edge.
That is exactly where it needs to be.
I thought you said we were looking for 1.3.3?
Yes. Oh, sorry. I wanted, okay. Thanks for clarifying. I wanted to basically ask you to stop me when I got to the measure, and then I'll stop you when I get to the quarter note beat, and then I'll stop you, or stop me when I get to the 16th. So let's stop at the measure.
Stop.
Stop.
Measure
Stop.
1. Okay, great. Hammer time. Stop. All right. So then I stopped at measure 1. Now let me stop at the third quarter note beat.
Stop.
Stop.
Great. So I'm stopped at the third quarter note beat, and look, it says 1.3. It looks like we're on the right track, right? All right. Now let me go to the third 16th note. 1, 2.
Stop right there.
Stop.
And isn't this correct? Check. This is great because this even shows that we're correct. It says 1.3.3 over here. So the first measure, the third quarter note beat, the third 16th beat, right? This is great. It basically proved what we were talking about. Okay. Let's do another example. In fact, let's do this one. Well, let me just change this. I don't actually have 4 measures here to show you, but I can do this in Ableton. So 4.2.4, let's find it in Ableton. Okay, so I'll zoom out. 4.2.4, what does the first 4 refer to? The measure, right? So I'm gonna go to 4, look, I'm 4, measure 4. In fact, I could just keep zooming in and then eventually I'll just see it, right? 4.2, so this is measure 4. This is the second quarter note beat within measure 4. If I zoom in a little more, look at that, 4.2.4. So this is measure 4. This is the second quarter note beat within measure 4. And this is the fourth 16th note within measure 4. So actually I've changed the grid to be 16th notes. So this is the second quarter note beat, the second 16th, the third 16th, the fourth 16th, And then the next one should be the next quarter note, okay? All right, anyway. So we've talked about this before. This is like one of the most important concepts that I use all the time, this grid resolution. Basically, the grid resolution just shows you how much, well, it basically shows you how much resolution there is in terms of where you can put your mouse on the grid. So like when I zoom in, you see a grid resolution number right here, 1/128th, 1/64th, 1/32nd, 1/16th, 1/8th, right? These numbers just basically tell you the resolution of the grid. And actually, if we think about what this number means down here, it's saying that the resolution is 1/4, which basically means the resolution is quarter notes. If you look at this graphic right here, when I labeled things like this, it's basically showing you the beat duration in terms of quarter notes. So it's 1/4 represents, it's showing the beat duration in terms of a whole note, I'm sorry. It's showing the whole note duration in terms of quarter notes. So this is basically 1/4, I'm sorry, give me 1 second. I'm not telling the truth right now, I apologize. I'm not telling the truth. What this is telling you is this is telling you that the grid resolution is a quarter note. It's 1/4, it's a quarter note, right? A quarter, right? Which basically means that when it's looking at this, it's basically, you're gonna see grid lines every single quarter note. 1/4 of a measure, of a traditional measure, right? If I change this to be higher or lower, this grid resolution, now you're going to see the grid resolution be every half note, 1/2, okay? Which means that if I look at this particular, let's go to measure 1, just for simplicity. The places I can actually click within the measure are every half note. I can't, even though it's showing this particular beat, I can't actually click here. It's only letting me click at these particular junctions in time. If I change the grid resolution, remember Command 1 is the shortcut to increase or decrease grid resolution, but I could also right click and change the grid resolution by clicking this. Now, oh, this is actually what we want, okay? Now I'm at half note grid resolution. Now I'm at quarter note grid resolution. So notice how I can actually click on the first 1, 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4. If I change this to 16ths, now I go 1, 1.1.1, 1.1.2, 1.1.3, 1. Etc. And then now I'm at 1.2.1, 1.2.2, 1.3.3, 1.2.4, etc. Okay? Getting really in depth in this, but I guess what you need to know is that you can basically adjust the number of subdivisions that you actually see, which is a really useful thing to know to do, so that you could just input notes to where you want them to be. So if you don't know anything about rhythm, or you forgot everything that I just told you, grid resolution is really important because it's just very simple from the standpoint that if you want to create longer notes, you basically increase the grid resolution. sorry, you decrease the grid resolution. If you want to create shorter notes, you just increase the grid resolution, and you can create notes of this length, and now you can create notes of this length. So that's basically a continuation. This whole thing has basically been a continuation on the idea of rhythm, or of basically subdivision and time, the concept of subdivision and time. Rhythm itself has to do with the precise placement of ideas. So for instance, if I put a clip here and I put a clip here, and I put a clip here, this has a particular rhythm, right? But what we've talked about what we've been really talking about is subdivision, how you can basically subdivide time into smaller units of time, and what they call those things. So anyway, please refer to this video in these concepts if you ever do need a kind of refresher on this stuff. Again, it's not required that you know this, but I'm trying to expose the music theory stuff that you might find useful earlier on the quarter, just in case it's useful, and you can these concepts can kind of ruminate for you. Okay. People asked about tempo. And tempo just refers to the speed in which a piece of music is played. So in this little top transport control section in Ableton, this number right here refers to the tempo. And basically it's represented in beats per minute. And changing the tempo doesn't alter the rhythmic proportion of the piece. It only affects the speed at which the piece plays. So I have this musical example that I've cooked up, and it plays at different tempos. Now here are the same exact notes, but played at a faster tempo. Here are the same notes, but played in yet even a ridiculous, obnoxiously fast tempo. Right? Here are the same notes played in yet even more obnoxious tempo. It's the same exact, the proportions between the notes don't change. It's just basically the tempo just tells you how fast you traverse through the events, okay? And in Ableton, this is up here on this tempo control transport, part of the transport section, okay? Okay, let us put some of this stuff to practice. I will create a new Ableton project. I'll save this. And by the way, let me know if the levels are decent. I'm gonna change the audio output to be a little softer. By the way, could you just hear what I was playing?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, I'm going to create a MIDI track. And today I think we might even get to audio tracks if we're lucky. So I'm going to create a new MIDI track, and I'm going to lay down some drums like I always do. So I'm going to go to create. My top bar is struggling to show information. Come on. Come on. There we go. Okay. Okay. I'm going to create a MIDI track. And this track is a container for the data that we're about to put in. I'm going to go to drums. I'm going to drag in this. Someone had a really interesting kit. can't remember what it was called, but it was used by a few students. It had a very rich sound. Does anyone remember the name of that kit? It was almost like a dubstep-y, very, very powerful kit. But let me actually lower the volume of my Ableton right now, just so that I'm not blasting your ears. Can you guys hear this? The preview might be a little soft. Right?
Someone in the chat is saying alert kit, A-L-E-R-T.
Oh, there it is. The alert kit. That's the one. Okay, so I'm going to drag this alert kit onto this MIDI track. Of course, I could actually alternatively just drag it right here as well. I'm going to drag it right here. And now I've got this kit, okay? Now, if I want to create a MIDI clip, just to kind of reiterate, I don't want to take anything for granted. If I want to create a MIDI clip, I select a region. I select a portion of the grid, I right click and I click Insert MIDI Clip, right? Selecting a region. In this particular case, I'm going to select 4 bars, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. It's all the way up to measure 5. I'm going to right click, Insert MIDI Clip, bam. I got a MIDI clip. Now, if I want to create some notes, just double click on some of the grid squares. I could also engage the pencil tool, but I'm just going to click into the square. By the way, my grid resolution is in 1/8 notes right now. That's fine. Maybe I'll change it to quarter notes. 1/4, 1/4, okay, great. Now I'm going to do my classic thing that I always do so far. It's just kick, turn on the preview, kick, snare, or no, oh, kick, snare, kick, snare. Nice, right? This is a classic kind of alternating pattern. If I select all these notes, I could also duplicate them all by right-clicking and clicking duplicate. And there we go, right? Got something. Right? Now this is playing at this tempo, 120 beats per minute. If I want to make this play a little slower, I could change the tempo by going to 100. Maybe I want some, or maybe I want something a little slower, maybe like 60. Right? Now it's playing the same events, but it's playing them slower, right? It's still, all the proportions are still correct, right? This is still landing on beat 2, second quarter note beat, but it's just getting to that position faster. If I change this to 300, 30, notice how it's taking more time to traverse through these events. But if I change this to 60, right? There we go. Let's just add some stuff, some auxiliary stuff. Hi-hats are nice for some kind of splashes of high frequency energy. Mess around with stuff. There's no right way to do things. So it occurred to me that this thing that I have right here, I like it, I think, but I might want to make it a little faster. So I could take all these things and click divide by 2. I don't know. It's something. I still haven't decided what to do about this, but maybe I'll do something just simpler. I'll just do hi-hats, duplicate them, Command D, shortcut to duplicate. You see me make this drum beat so many times by now, but this is just a very, very classic drum beat. You could reference that drum beat pattern book for more complicated patterns, but this is a tried and true pattern. In fact, if you do learn acoustic drums, this is like one of the first patterns that you'll learn when you're actually playing a drum kit. Old Faithful. So maybe I'll change these hi-hats. Instead of, you notice how there's two different types of hi-hats. There's this hi-hat step, and there's this hi-hat machine closed. Maybe what I'll do is I'll take every other hi-hat, or I'll take a few of the hi-hats, and I'll change it up so that they're not always this hi-hat. I'm going to turn off this preview so I don't have to hear myself drag these down every time. If I click this preview, do that every time I do this. So maybe I'll just change some of these. Maybe it would sound better if I just alternated it. Bump, 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 bump. This kind of gives it a little bit of a more round robin realism. It gives it a little bit of relief, right? Otherwise, if you hear the same sample over and over and over again, it kind of gets to your head a little bit. So you kind of, it's the same concept of a sound. They're both hi-hats, but you get to kind of get some relief in the pattern by alternating them like this. So maybe I like that, and I'll just duplicate that. There we go. Whoops. Oh. Great. Okay. Good enough for me, right? So, great. I've got some drums. Now, what I want to do now is I want to create some notes. Again, I'm going to show you a music theory based approach, and then we're going to actually shift away. I'm going to show you ways of just downloading songs and putting them into your projects if this is too intimidating. But for those who are curious to learn about this, you can never start too early. So I just want to give you some broad strokes fundamentals on it, okay? So let's say I want to create a bass line. I navigate to the browser. In the browser, I can go to sounds, and I could look up a bass sound. Remember, a bass kind of fills out the low end of the sonic spectrum. If you check out instrumentation section of the OneNote, if you go to bass, you can kind of see that it provides the low end frequency of the frequency spectrum, kind of gives some meat to the sound. So I'm gonna look up some particular sounds. Okay, cool. So I'm just gonna drag this sound right here into the dropped files and devices area. And what I've got here is, oh wow, this is sorry. I didn't recognize this device for a second, and I kind of freaked out because I worried that I was showing you a version of Ableton that hadn't come out yet, but this is correct. Okay. Okay, so one of the first things I'm going to do is, this is the device that was created, right? I want to go to clip view to actually see the clip. So I could click right here, and there's actually no clip, right? Because on this particular track, there's this kind of bass sound, but there's no sheet music. And currently there's no container to put that sheet music. So that's why we need a clip. We need to actually create a little container for the sheet music. We have a container for the device, but we don't have a container for the clip. So let me actually right click and create insert MIDI clip. And I'm going to create, I don't know, I'll create just, I'll use the note D, okay? I'm gonna go lower than that. All right, and I'm just gonna use this one note D. Just gonna extend it out.
How did you change the octave?
How did I change the octave? I did a little trickery right there, didn't I? So I highlight this little note right here. You can hold down Shift and press up and down the octave. But you know, another thing you can do is just drag it up. But it's cool to use that shortcut. An octave change the register in which this note is being played. So this was, before it was D1, now it's D2. Holding shift up takes it to D3, that's D2, D1, okay? So I'm gonna choose a nice low note to kind of be the anchor for my piece, okay? Right? It's a nice little anchor. Ooh, you know what? I'm gonna change the bass sound. For reasons I'm not going to tell you why. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna create some notes to go over this, okay? So I'm just gonna go through this example. And this is by no means the only way you have to create music. This is a way that uses the music theory that's on the one note. And this is probably one of the last times I'm gonna do it in this way, but I'll show you anyway. So I'm gonna create a scale of notes, and I'm basically, for the sad, intense, ruminating type song that I'm going for, I'm gonna use these particular notes, okay? Importantly, if I use any set of notes, there are certain notes that feel more stable than others, okay? So if I use this collection of pitches, this scale, if I use these notes, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, certain notes feel more stable. In fact, the note that feels most stable is the first note of the scale, okay? That is the anchor, okay? So that's precisely what I've chosen my bass to play. It's the anchor at this particular moment, okay? But for the other notes, I'm going to dilly-dally over these other notes, but I'm going to kind of deliberately land on some of these notes that I've boxed out in yellow, because these are the most stable notes. I'm claiming that these are the most stable notes in the scale, okay? This is the most stable note in the scale. And these other notes I'm going to kind of anchor. I'm going to create a melody, but I'm kind of deliberately land on these letters right here, okay? So let's create this scenario, okay? So I'm going to rename this track and call it bass. I'm going to call this drums. And now let's create some sort of melody, okay? And in order to do that, you know, there's many different places you can go, but for this particular application, I'm going to go up to Synth Lead, okay? And I'm going to go to Sounds, and I'm going to go to Synth Lead to get kind of a soaring kind of, if you imagine if Van Halen, rest in peace, Eddie Van Halen, if you imagine he played the keys, which he probably did, and you can kind of imagine this kind of ripping solo, you can go to a Synth Lead, and this is kind of the lead keyboard equivalent of a kind of a shredding guitar solo. I'll do this. Okay, so I'm going to drag this instrument right here. No, not this one. I'm looking for something with character, but also clean sounding. Do this now. I'll just take this out. Why not? Okay, so once again, now I'm going to rename this track. I'm going to call this Melody. Okay. I'm going to select the region that I want to create a clip for. I'm going to right click that region, and I'm going to click Insert Midi Clip. Okay. And now I've basically, I see my piano roll in front of me. And what I want to do is I want to create this kind of sad, ruminating kind of scale. By doing so, I want to create these notes. Okay, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. I'm going to create these notes like this. And I'm going to click the fold button, which basically hides all the other notes. And now, what I could do, now here's a little trick. If I want these notes to stay here, if I want this grid to look like this, I have to actually, I can't delete these notes. Or I could now, but if I unfold it, you can see how it just goes back to the way it was, right? So there's a little bit of a trick that I can show you to kind of keep the notes there. Remember, I'm seeing the letters to the left, right? I'm typing D, E, you can see it right here to the left, F, G, A, B, C, D. So I'm going to call this. Now, I could hide these, I could keep these notes here, I can hide them by all of them and pressing 0. And that's basically hiding the notes, but they're still there. They're not being played, but they're basically here so that I can reference them if I want. So it's basically keeping the grid in check if I fold. And I can press 0 to unmute a particular note. But anyway, getting a little ahead of myself. You don't have to use this fold workflow. But I'm just going to create some notes. And I'm going to use the quarter note grid setting, 1/4, right? Zooming in, 1/4. And I'm going to type in some notes. Scale. Now, what I claimed earlier was that these notes right here are the most stable notes, F, A, and D, right? The first, third, and fifth notes of the scale, right? So let me just hang out on those notes, okay? I'll just do the third note. Maybe I'll climb down to the second note. I'll go down to the first note. Okay. Maybe I'll make this a little faster. Right? Okay. So what I did is I'm using a scale, a collection of notes that I've kind of set over here, and for convenience, I've folded them so these are the only notes that I can see at the moment. And I've basically selected notes of the scale that are stable, the more stable to kind of land on, okay? This is a way you can approach making music. This is like the most simple primer I can give you. Oh, Alex, do you have a question?
When you say land on, what do you mean exactly?
Land on.
The stable notes to land on.
Okay, so landing on these notes, what I'm referring to is basically I'm basically creating a note at this position in time. That's a good question. So for instance, if I land on the note, I'm basically, I'm arriving at this stable note, this first degree of the scale at this particular time. And I'm kind of sitting there for an extended period of time in this. So the idea is you could arrive at these different notes at different points in time. And if you want to emphasize a particular note, you make it longer. If you want to de-emphasize the note, you can make it shorter. You could also, putting the note at a particular position in the measure also emphasizes or de-emphasizes the notes. So for instance, if I'm at the beginning of this measure and I put the stable note at the beginning of this measure, if I land on this note at this particular time, this is going to emphasize the fact that it's stable. So for instance, check this out. I'm going to put a bunch of stable notes on the beginning of the measure, okay? I'm going to put unstable notes in between. Right? A little quicker. Well, no, I'm going to keep it the way it was. Now, if I flipped that arrangement, if I inverted it and I put all the stable notes on the off beats and I put the unstable notes on the stronger beats, like basically the beginning of the measure or each quarter note. Yeah, if I put, let's say I put a weak note or an unstable note, I should say, on the beginning of each measure. Let's just hear how that sounds. Sounds a little less resolved or stable than this, right? So these are kind of things you can play around with. You can play with this kind of, and playing around with the idea of expectation, tension and release. You know, you have a stable note, you have an unstable note. Playing around with this paradigm is a very fine way to go. So you can have like stable, unstable, stable, 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 or sorry, unstable, stable, for instance.
Nakul, there's a couple of questions about what is stable and how do we know that it's stable or unstable.
Okay, so the way I've described it, in the most simplistic of terms, if you have a scale, a scale is 7 notes, and you're kind of using this as kind of a template for your melody. The first, third, and fifth notes of the scale, you could generalize as being stable. The first scale degree is the most stable. The third scale degree and fifth scale degree are moderately stable. And actually, I have more stuff that I could probably talk about here. These are generally the most safe notes to land on. Sorry, I'm using the word land on. These are the most safe notes to kind of arrive to. If you have these particular notes in your piece, you're playing it safe. It's probably going to sound conservatively good in kind of a classic sense.
But also in relation to the bass note, yes.
In relation to the bass note, that's really important. So in essence, if you're creating a whole collage of different instruments, there's just a hierarchy, I guess. You have to, the bass note is the foundational, it's the anchor of your piece of music. So when you're constructing, if you're constructing a piece of music around a particular scale, your bass note is going to emphasize the first scale degree. It's going to emphasize the first note of the scale. And this is what we have. We have basically the bass note. We've created this scale, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. And the bass note is playing the D note. Whereas if I look at the melody, it's free to emphasize other notes, but eventually, if you want to have a really, really strong, the strongest possible sonority, you could argue that it could come back to the D note, the first scale degree, to create the strongest kind of sonority. For this reason, the first scale degree is the most kind of obvious choice for ending your song. For instance, if I actually, I'm going to change my audio interface for a second. Well, actually, I don't have. Yeah, maybe I'll do that. Can you bear with me for 1 second? I'm going to play something on the piano, and I'll kind of give you a sense for how stability, instability might hit you. Hello, can you hear me? Probably, I'm using a different microphone at this point. Ooh, okay, great. Let me turn up the volume a little bit. Sorry, excuse me. Okay, sorry, I have to reach under my desk and hit other notes in the meantime. So, okay, so, if I play Happy Birthday, statistically it's 50% chance again it's someone's birthday. I'm basically ending the piece on the most stable note. I'm basically ending it on the 1. But let me play Happy Birthday, but I'll end it not on the first scale degree. It doesn't sound as stable, right? I mean, you might still have a Happy Birthday, but it's not looking too good, right? But now, you're pretty much guaranteed to have a Happy Birthday because you ended on the stable note. So a lot of songs, they just end in that paradigm, you know? I mean, it's just the way a lot of pieces of music work. So if you want to play it safe, if you want to end with a bang, or you want to, you could end on this kind of stable note of the scale, which is the first note of the scale. And this is we're just talking about how you can create a piece of music centered around a scale. We're not even talking about chords or any of that stuff. That stuff is there, but we won't talk about that, at least not yet. Before I ever talk about any of that stuff, I guess I'll show you really simple ways of avoiding music theory altogether, or avoiding worrying about the specific pitches that you're actually using in your song. There are other ways of creating music where you can concentrate on the sound instead of worrying about the pitch collection stuff. But again, with students, with this many students in the class, there's bound to be a lot of students who are familiar with this, who are interested in this sort of approach to music making. There are bound to be others who prefer a totally different approach, but I'm exposing this to you early on. So going back, just to kind of put a bow on it, I have a scale right here. I lost my scale. Okay. I folded it so I only see the notes that of the scale at the exact point when I folded it, which is the notes of the scale. So incidentally, you might be in a situation where if you just never touch this button, you're okay. You might just want to set it and forget it. Just like you set your notes and just leave them the way it is. You might be in a situation where you want to have 2 octaves. You want to do this again. You want to go up and you want to get E, A, B, D, D. Again, I'm just following this exact formula of this scale. I'm just basically using these exact notes. And if I fold this, now I've got 2 octaves to play with. So I can delete these notes. If I click, I don't want to click this fold button again, otherwise I lose this focus that I have. Well, let me just play some stable notes, okay? Okay. Let me multiply by 2. Right? Even faster. Right? This kind of gives a characteristic, like this, you can't really go wrong with this. Like this is just going to sound somewhat familiar just by how often this is employed. And based on the conception that this is quote unquote stable, a lot of people use it, and there's a high preponderance of use in music around the world. So if you use this, your chances are you're going to come up with something that you're familiar with. That sounds somewhat familiar to you. Right? So that's all stable notes. Now, if I did this, if I shifted these all up, all these notes sound a little off in a sense, right? But basically, I'm using 1, 3, 5, 3, 5, and then I'm going 1, 3, 5, right? 1, skipping 2, 3, skipping 4, 5, right? And I have this kind of thing that kind of sounds believable or reasonable, right? Okay. Any questions? You know what? I haven't opened the chat yet. I'm just going to look at the chat and
Yeah, that's a mistake, Nicole.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just looked at that. Over 99 chats. Okay, goodness. I'm just going to look at the top chat. It's kind of like winning the lottery if I look at your chat message. You could do a section of a song using 1, 3, 5, and then play around with stable. Right. Okay. All right. I don't know when these chats were made, so I'm going to stop looking. Let's look at an example of stable versus unstable one more time. Okay, so I'm going to delete these notes. I'm going to go to unstable. I'm going to increase the grid resolution. Unstable, stable. Unstable, unstable. Stable, stable, unstable, stable. Unstable, stable, stable, unstable, unstable, most stable. So I'm kind of dancing around, I'm kind of alternating. The common thing that people do is they alternate between stable and unstable. Right? So this is something you can experiment with. This is a very common thing. Just alternate stable and unstable. And there's a study of music called Counterpoint. And this is this is one of the common things in certain types of counterpoint to do this. And it's nice because you're baking in this tension and release, like tension, release, tension, release, tension, or no, this is not tense. But by doing so, you kind of have this feeling of it's you want a little bit of a happy movie without any conflict is not really a good movie, right? You need a little bit of conflict, you need a little bit of resolution, right? You need some of this tension and release in the same vein, right? So baking in a little bit of tension or conflict into your music and resolving that conflict is satisfying to the listener, right? It plays off our expectations. Okay. So anyway, that is basically a very, okay, okay. What does it sound like if we take all the stable notes in a key and play them together? Let's do that. So I'm going to add a chordal instrument. Remember, if I go back and show you where this is, there are a few different places where you can find chordal instruments. If I want something more percussive, I can go here, percussive, piano and keys, synth rhythmic. If I want something a little more lush and sustained, something like that, I can go to pad, right? So I'm going to go to instruments, and I'm going to go to, where am I going to go? I'm going to go to sounds, I'm sorry, and I'm going to go to pad. I'm going to create kind of a luscious chord. Okay, kind of like this. Okay, I'm going to drag this on here. And, oh, whoops. Yeah, that's fine. And now I'm gonna rename this track. I'm gonna call it chord. Okay. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a clip, right-click the region of grid, insert Midi clip. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna type up that scale one more time. And I'm gonna fold it so that it's only showing those notes. And now, what if I just take the stable notes and only play the stable notes, but all at the same time? What I get is a chord. So this chord is actually a little bit more complicated than I thought it would be because there are other sounds baked in, but it sounds cool, right? Check it out. Let me actually simplify the chord. It's actually, for reasons that are not simple for me to explain, it's playing more than just these notes right now. So let me actually. But I do like that sound that I have. I want to remember what it is. A rabbit's dream, with rabbit spelled wrong. Okay. I'm gonna try this air light. Uh-oh. Right. So this is basically let me show you the intervening notes because they got lost. Right? So basically, in order to create this chord, I just used the first, basically what I did was I took all of these notes, these stable notes, I just played them all together. And you get something that sounds nice. Change the sound. So this is this is like kind of I used a very prescribed approach here. Like I just basically didn't have to do much emotional soul searching or agonizing when I was trying to think about this. I was just literally using music theory to construct this particular thing. And I'm just using this idea of stable notes, unstable notes, etc., to kind of accomplish this. So hopefully this makes sense to you. It's funny, once again, I was not expecting to talk about this to this degree. I had a lot of other stuff to talk about, but it's probably for the best that we're just kind of spending some time on this, especially since the homework's, you have a little more time to do the homework. Okay. So I do want to get your feet wet just a little bit. I want to look at some of this stuff. We haven't talked about acoustics, audio, that kind of stuff. There is an aspect of homework that requires you to use automation. So maybe, okay, let's see. Where to proceed? I do want to show you this really quickly. This is probably a good use of time. We started 5 minutes early, so I might, okay, late. So let me tell you something really quickly. What I do want to tell you is this idea, it's under resources, that you could literally download MIDI files and put them into your Ableton project. So for instance, if I go to this website, BitMidi, and I want to download Super Mario Medley, one sec, sorry. Whoops, okay. All right, whoops, sorry about that. Okay, so what I did just now is I literally just downloaded this MIDI file. So what I'm gonna do to show you what you can do, just in case all this theory stuff is very overwhelming for you, you know, I think someone said, well, I'll just show you. I'm gonna go to downloads, and I think that it's actually here. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I can literally take this MIDI file that I downloaded and put it into my track, and look at this. Now it sounds funny because it's using the wrong sounds, but let's create some extra tracks for these, okay? So this MIDI track has 2 tracks, okay? So let's actually create 2 MIDI tracks. Create, insert MIDI track, create, insert MIDI track, and let's actually drag this MIDI file on here, and notice how when I drag it, it creates 2, it drags over 2 tracks. And right now, this MIDI is not doing anything. because there's no device. It's just sheet music without an instrument to play the sheet music. So what I got to do is I got to drag an instrument onto here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to instruments. I'm just going to look at one of my favorites, rhythm section instruments. Oh no, it's gone. I'm going to go to piano. And how about just a lo-fi piano? I'll drag it here, and now so I literally, you're not limited to Super Mario. You can download off the resources that I showed you on the web. You can download almost any song in this sort of format, and you can put it into your track. It's sort of a way to start out. So in this configuration, you don't have to think about the notes that much, right? You literally downloaded the notes off the internet. If I wanted to, I could just take my existing drum beat and kind of put a beat on top of it. And I'll copy this drum beat and put it over here. Whoops, that's not the drum beat. Right? So in this particular case, you might want to just bypass this. You might just want to do a remix for a particular song that you've downloaded off the internet. And you might not want to do much thought, put much thought into actual notes you choose. And you might want to put more thought into the drums that you use, or the particular kind of rhythms that you overlay on top, or the effects that you put on. Maybe you want to like slap a bass line on it or something. Maybe you want to use this as a template. Question?
So in order to download a file like that and use it in a MIDI track, does it have to be a MIDI file?
It has to be a MIDI file. Yes, it has to be a MIDI file in order to use it in the manner that we're talking about. In the manner I'm talking about, I mean, like, you can literally change the notes. We haven't talked about audio files. We're going to talk about audio files next class. But if you want to actually, excuse me, yes, it has to be a MIDI file. And on the OneNote, there are actually a few different websites that you can use. This particular website has a bunch of classical music, so you can like remix a classical piece. You could take a pop piece or a world music piece, and you can add it. You can mess around with it. And there's a bunch of MIDI files out there. All your favorite video games usually have these MIDI files readily available. So you can kind of, oh, you know what? Did I not change my microphone? I might be a little softer. I apologize. That's why I like using my microphone. Sorry about that. So let's see. So yeah, you can download MIDI files off the internet in this manner. And so, for example, you know, Star Wars theme. I'll just download this. There we go. Avoid all the viruses on this website. You can't learn lead guitar in 1 hour. But anyway, let's take a look at this. I'm going to go back to Ableton, and I am going to, instead of Super Mario, it was good, but I'm going to change track a little bit. And I'm going to drag the Star Wars theme onto Ableton. Oh, and look at this. There's actually a lot of different instruments here. So when you drag it on, it'll actually say, oh, it'll tell you what it is. It's like, oh, you want a horn here. You want a string here. You want a flute instrument here. You want a clarinet instrument here, right? But let's just, for simplicity's sake, let's just say I take a piano sound and just put it on all of these particular instruments. Okay. Copying the device onto all of these particular tracks. I could also drag it from the browser, but let's see what this sounds like. This is not going to sound correct because I'm just using the same sound. Drums is certainly not going to sound correct, so I'm going to go to drums. In fact, you know what? Well, we're running slightly bit over, but this is recorded, so if you want to watch this in just a moment, I think it's worth just showing this really quickly. Apologize for keeping you. Let me go to
drums, and let me drag one of those drum kits here. I'm just going to drag an 808 core kit, put it on the drums. I'm going to look up a brass instrument. I'm going to go to sounds. I'm going to go to, oh, look, there's a brass section. I'm just going to drag alpha brass, 80 synth brass, why not? For clarinet, I'm just going to search clarinet in the browser, orchestral. Put that over here. I'm going to be very surprised if this sounds anything like Star Wars, but we'll see. We'll try it anyway. Search for a flute instrument. And flute. I'm just creating, because right now this is just sheet music. I'm actually just dragging on the devices that actually renders these instruments. For strings, I'm going to search strings. Okay. For French horn, I'm going to just search for French horn. You probably won't have that. You might just want to get a horn section, a horn instead. For brass, I guess I'll just grab brass. Alpha brass, like an 80s kind of brass, why not? And then for bass, I want some fingered bass, so I'm going to take, what happens if I type in fingered bass? Probably nothing. Oh, fingered bass, no, fingered bass. Electric bass, maybe. Okay, let's see how this sounds. This is probably not going to sound anything like Star Wars, so I apologize in advance for ruining your childhood. Let's take a listen. Wow. Okay. It sounded worse than I thought it was going to sound. But so you're going to have to tweak these particular instruments to get them to sound somewhat reasonable. These drum mappings, the weird thing about drum notation is that they might not reference the thing that you're expecting it to reference. Like there's a generalized mapping for where these drums appear on the piano roll, but sometimes it's not. People adhere to different standards. So for instance, these things right here, I don't think these might not have been supposed to be snare hits. These might have meant to be like bass drum hits. I'm not 100% sure. But there are like, I guess we can talk more about that. That's worth talking about another time. But anyway, long story short, you could create MIDI data by using this kind of a music theory process. We've shown this kind of approach at the very beginning of the track that we created. Alternatively, you can download this data off a website like one of these websites, and you could just use them in their entirety. And you could, the fun that you have in the creative process might just be like assigning sounds to these particular assigning different sounds or creating some sort of remix. Or you might combine approaches. You might find that you have a piece of music that you want to reference and you want to kind of modify just ever so slightly to accommodate this, just to kind of put a little bit more of your own spin in terms of the domain of the notes that you use. So music theory might come in handy, the music theory we've discussed. So you're not limited. You can see how there are a variety of approaches, and none of them are off limits. So if you did what I just did for your homework assignment, that's totally acceptable. Like you have a drum track, you have another track, right? This is totally an acceptable way of doing it. But if you did this for the homework assignment, this is also totally an acceptable way of creating music. Depending on your background, what type of music you're familiar with, you might choose one way or the other, or both. There's no right and wrong. It's just really, it's meant to be fun. So just, I use both approaches, in fact. So anyway, this is just a conversation about MIDI and this kind of data, but we're going to talk about audio data next time. We're going to talk about the automation component of the homework assignment, which is a very fun kind of topic. But anyway, hopefully this was illuminating and for you all. If you have any questions, I'll be sticking around. And yes.
I have a question.
Sure.
I have two questions. One is there a way to do multi-shot recording? I've never been able to figure that out.
Multi-shot recording. How do you mean?
Like, that's just what I've seen it called before. It's like when you record over something, it doesn't delete the notes that was already there.
Ah, okay. We haven't really talked about recording yet, have we?
Yeah.
There's a whole gamut of things to say about recording on the OneNote, and it's actually there. Or actually, no, maybe it's not there. But what you're referring to is this thing called overdubbing.
Overdubbing, that makes sense.
And we haven't actually talked about record enabling a track yet and actually recording your own data.
Yeah.
That's something worth talking about. But once we get to that conversation, if you want to get a sneak peek at it, you can look at this particular section. If you click this little button, if you're recording something, you can overdub it by clicking this plus button, and then it won't destroy what you have.
Plus button. Cool.
Yeah.
The only other thing, I was having trouble finding a free auto-tune because Ableton doesn't come with one, right?
Yes, there is a good free auto-tune, and I'm blanking on the name of it right now. I'm trying to actually compile on the resources section some plugins that are good. I'll add the auto-tune to it. Oh, you know what I think it is? I think there's a company called Melda Plugins, Melda Productions, and I think they have an auto-tune.
Cool.
They have a free pack, and I love their stuff. I actually, over the course of the class, especially next class, I'm going to show you some of their plugins. Again, this is something we haven't talked about. What for those of you who don't know, there's a way to.
Sorry, what were they called?
Melda Productions, I think, is the name.
Thanks.
Sure. For those of you who don't know what plugins are, it's basically a way to augment Ableton by using external devices. This is not the focus of the class, but I kept it here just in case you're interested, for those who are interested. For instance, if you might have heard of people using Serum or Massive.
I was just going to ask if you know any good alternatives to Serum, because $180 is a little steep.
Yes, there is this free thing called Surge. I think it's called Surge. It's complicated, but it's really powerful. It's something that you could investigate. And who knows? There might be some way for you to get Serum. Who knows?
Cool. That's all I had to ask. If I can look at Melda Productions later today for sure.
Great. So anyway, I guess just to kind of keep things more on what we talked about, just look up MIDI files here. Drum machine patterns are here. Again, you can create these from scratch. There's a whole section on the OneNote about how to create this stuff from scratch. But if you just want to shortcut and you just want to download something that's already existed, you could just download the MIDI files here. And some of you might have a sigh of relief. You might have been looking at this music theory and thinking, oh my gosh, this is too much. So I'll tell you, every single time I've taught a class like this, everyone always has really cool music, because there's just so many different ways of getting ideas to come to life. There's no like, there's a quote by Stravinsky, I'm going to misquote it here, like, good composers borrow, great composers steal. I really like that. I don't think you have to have complete agency over everything that you do. You could totally borrow from someone else. You could totally steal and literally rip something. This is very common in music, to just use what someone else has done, and then there's still a lot of creative agency you have in the process. It's really, you can be a curator of sorts and still have a lot of fun in the music process. In fact, that's how I kind of look at it. I don't have to like literally create everything, every aspect of everything that I make. I can offload it, certain aspects of the creative process, to other people and to other using other means, and then I could still find a way to be satisfied and create cool music.
There was a question earlier. Sorry, you go.
Oh, I was gonna ask, how do you deal with like delay on your MIDI keyboard?
Okay. That right there. In fact, I don't think I have a section on that. But what it basically refers to in the audio setup of your Ableton, what you want to do. By the way, are you on Windows or are you on Mac?
I'm on Windows, but I also use Mac.
Okay. For one, if you're sharing audio over Zoom, there's going to be a delay. That's something I've had to deal with, but that's probably not what you're dealing with. What you want to do in this settings is you want to first see if you can lower this buffer size value to a lower value.
Right.
Look, what is it? Do you know what it's set at right now?
Let me. I don't have it open right now, but
no worries. Another thing that seems to help when I was on Windows for many years, most of my life, there was this thing called ASIO for all, which really helped increase the speed of my, reduce the latency, the delay in Ableton. It's got its own pain in the butt kind of things to think about, but I will add a section here to kind of remind myself.
all right, thank you. Oh, did you also mention automation, or is that something you didn't talk about later?
No, we didn't talk about it today. We will talk about it next class, or
okay,
at the latest, the following class. Automation is, yeah, it's a very, very cool subject.
Okay, thanks.
Of course.
Professor, I have questions about how to import the sound library from Logic to Live.
Importing a sound library from Logic into Live. It depends on what you mean by that. If you mean by
like the software instrument.
Okay, I think if you go to plugins and you click, if you go to the browser, you click plugins. These are like the external plugins that Ableton doesn't come with. You can see that I've acquired a lot of these through either by buying them or I don't know how I got them, but they're here. And if I go to Apple, I believe the ones you're looking for are these Apple plugins, maybe?
Yeah.
Is that what these might be what you're talking? I have Logic, I actually bought Logic, but I don't use it I haven't been using it that much. I'm trying to get better at it, so I don't know if this is what you're referring to.
I mean, there's some, like I have a software drum on Logic. So I create a MIDI track of drum. So when I just like input the MIDI file directly from Logic to Live, the drum will sound really weird.
Oh.
So no matter any drum I try to use in that MIDI track, it will sound really weird.
Oh, I'm seeing. So okay, so let me get this straight. You have this particular MIDI clip in Logic, but when you bring it into Ableton, it sounds funny?
Yeah, so I want to import the same drum from Logic to Live.
Okay, there's a couple of things I have to say about that. One of the things I have to say about that touches on this idea of why the Star Wars drum sounded so funny. It's this idea that the drum instruments aren't mapped to the correct notes. So like one thing is to go to Ableton and map, like you might find that these notes are actually supposed to map to a kick drum instead of a snare drum. So I think that's one thing that you can look into. It can get, okay, to fully answer your question, it can get complicated. Like you can actually interface Ableton and Logic using this thing called Rewire, but I don't think that's worth getting into. It's gonna overcomplicate. I don't think that's what you want. I think what you want is you want a consistent way to create. I think the short answer to your question is I think you have to shift the notes around to map them to the correct instrument. Or if you know.
Now the only solution I found is to like export the drum from Logic as audio and just input the audio to live.
Are you interested in having the same exact sounds that you used in Logic?
Yeah.
Well, the instruments that Logic has are different from the instruments that Ableton has. So you can't have the same exact sound unless you use an external plugin. Like for instance, Logic's like Smart Drummer, I forget what it's called, is not available in Ableton. Like you have to use Ableton sounds with the MIDI data. You can use the same MIDI data, but you have to use Ableton's drum sounds. That might have been, unfortunately, probably not what you wanted to hear, but if you know, Ableton's drum sounds aren't that bad. I think you just have to rearrange the drums so that they map correctly to Logic's drum, the sounds that you use. Yeah, because the same drum types are available to you. It's just that like the kick drum in Logic sounds is slightly different. It might be on this. It might be on a different spot on the track, so you just have to like move it down.
Yeah, got it.
Any other questions?
Yeah. What was I going to ask? Tuplets. So the grid, you can change the grid to a triplet resolution, but is there a way of doing complex tuplets, quintuplets, septuplets, etc.?
That's a great question. Yeah, we haven't even talked about tuplets yet, but that's something good.
No, I mean this was one of those expert guys. I don't know,
sure.
Blake
no.
or.
No, absolutely. Well, it's well, I guess I'll just I'll answer the question by giving a quick explanation of a very confusing thing that might happen to you. If you press Command 3, you'll accidentally go into tuplet grid resolution. So even if you don't know anything about tuplets, it's good to know that this thing exists because you might accidentally, inadvertently trigger this mode, and this completely throws off your grid in a way that you might not want it to be thrown off in. So be aware of that shortcut. I should add something about this to OneNote and talk about it in general. But as far as the answer to the question about whether you can have more complex grid resolutions, unfortunately, the answer is no currently. You could do the math by like actually zooming in and finding out stuff. You might be able to like, you could do the math by zooming in to some great length and then like creating the first subdivision and just duplicating it. And now I've got basically a dotted quarter note or something. This is actually a measure of 3. So I've got, yeah. So now it's like 4 against 3, essentially. So I mean, you could do the math. It's not.
Yeah, that's fine for a regular. That's fine for 3s and 4s. But when you can't do that for higher primes.
I think it's unfortunate.
So even if you divide the thing into 64 or 128, there's no 5 division of that or 7 division of that. So you can't actually do it to the grid.
Right. Yeah, this is something. Yeah, you know, it's funny when I do this. A lot of times I'll play it out, but yeah, this is an oversight in Ableton. It doesn't exist. Although I will say that I've heard on the grapevine that this plans to be added at some point. There's probably a way to get around this using Max for Live. This is something that we haven't talked about. Max for Live is this way to augment Ableton into this other thing, but it's certainly not a beginner-friendly sort of process. But since this person is not necessarily a beginner to be anyway, this might be worth investigating. So for instance, tuplets. Oh, TupGen. Yeah, someone has created this. It's a note generator, handles tuplets. So this thing exists. It's like a plugin to kind of augment Ableton, but it's a little bit. The workflow is not as straightforward as you would want it to be. Yeah, that's interesting though. That's gotten me thinking. That is.
You know, plenty of these like modern trap beats or like EDM use like quintuplets or septuplets that, you know, or irregular time signatures, and you can't do anything that's not a multiple of 4 in the current setup.
the way I guess you'd have to, the only way I can see getting around that is just through a very tedious approach. You could do this. Here's what you could do. Actually, I just realized you could do this. Check this out. Bear with me as I remember how to do what I'm about to tell you. There's a way to stretch the notes out. I'm trying to remember how to do it. You could proportionately stretch
Oh,
out.
okay, to like sort of quantize them. So
Yeah.
if you had 5 of them and then you wanted to fit them into a container that was the size of 8. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
exactly. And I'm trying to remember how to do that. And there is a way. I'll have to get back to you guys on how to do that. But
I'll experiment.
yeah, that's a really cool thing. You know, I'm glad someone brought this up because this is something I definitely want to incorporate. It's funny, when I get into Ableton, I could definitely benefit from doing more of this. It's like the workflow itself determines what you create. And like when
Sibelius, you know, you go crotchet equals 100, 4/4, you know, you use the mid-range because that's what the stave gives you. It's like the defaults totally define how you compose.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So I mean, this has gotten me excited about thinking about alternate ways because the default, yeah, it can totally constrain you. But let's see, this is this is an ongoing conversation that should definitely occur. So yeah, I'll figure out how to do that. Now I'm really curious. Magic, change. No, it's not working. But let's see. Okay, the class is sort of thinned out. A lot of times when this happens, this means that people like went to get lunch and they're not actually here. But I guess if anyone's here, I guess I'll just one-on-one ask. Andre, Patrick, Chad, Mackenzie, Keon, John, Summer, Ball.
I'm here.
John?
So actually, my computer is unable to install the Ableton. I don't know why.
Oh, what is your approach to installing Ableton?
So I used the link from the OneNote and